examining issues affecting the state. This is New Jersey Network's On the Record. Your host for On the Record, correspondent Larry Stuelpnagel.
Hello and welcome to On the Record. On Tuesday, Governor Kean delivered his annual State of the State message before a joint session of the legislature. Although the governor said the next budget he will present to lawmakers will be tight, overall his seventh State of the State address was upbeat, and he proposed a number of initiatives for his last year in office. To continue what he called the state's quiet revolution, Kean asked the legislature and voters to approve bond issues to preserve open spaces, clean up the ocean, and build new prisons. He also asked his Community Affairs Commissioner, Anthony Doc Villain, to cut the bureaucratic red tape that discourages developers from building homes. And the governor asked the legislature for a bill to allow the elderly to borrow from the Casino Revenue Fund to pay their property taxes. On the education front, Kean called for dropping state-mandated physical education classes, and he again asked lawmakers to allow parents to select the schools that their children will attend. And asking legislators to adopt a mandatory verbal threshold to lower auto insurance rates, the governor said if the verbal threshold is not adopted, it's time to scrap the no-fault system altogether. Now, how will the governor's initiatives fare, and how much clout does Tom Kean have in his last year in office? Two men with us today can either help or hurt the governor's plans. Democrat John Lynch is the Senate Majority Leader, while Republican Garabed Chuck Haytaian is the Majority Leader in the Assembly. Gentlemen, I thank you both for being with us today.
Pleasure.
Let's start off with just your general overall reaction to the governor's State of the State message, and let's just start in the upper house.
Larry, as usual, the governor was upbeat. Was well prepared, well delivered speech. But like some other years, I think that one of the problems was it's what he didn't say versus what he did say. The serious things were what he didn't say. He tried to be upbeat about development of affordable housing, remove regulations and red tape. Does that mean you're going to remove all the environmental protection regulations that are really the cause of developers' concerns and time and efforts and real dollar resources? I doubt it. It's the same DEP he's talking about at the same time that he says can't manage the coastal environment, which is why he wants to take jurisdiction away from him, that he's going to be saying cut the red tape to allow developers to start building more housing. He didn't say anything about taxes. He didn't say anything about what maybe that'll come with a budget message. He didn't say anything about the fact that we had $1 billion property tax increase in 1988 across this state because Trenton did very little, and that we're going to do little or nothing in 1989, and he recommends nothing, which means we're going to have another $1 billion plus property tax increase that the people out there are going to pay. The only thing he said about property taxes was that we're going to take care of some senior citizens who we're going to let them borrow some money so that they can stay in their own house. That's not a circuit breaker based upon income or needs or anything else. It's just a way to borrow so you can stay in your own house. That's the only property tax relief that I heard of in the whole message, which makes it a little difficult to understand how we're going to solve any real problems at the local level in 1989. But it's an upbeat message. It's ambitious, but behind it, the programs he's talking about don't have a lot of dollar substance because the governor is in a position where this is a year we've got to tighten up our belts. I think that was clear in the message between the lines, that what he talked about in terms of new programs were not big programs, that he's getting ready to tighten up, that he's concerned about the projections of revenue. We're going to hear a lot more about that in a couple of weeks at the budget message, and we're all watching.
Assemblyman Haytaian.
Well, Larry, I thought it was an excellent speech. Tom Kean has come a long way. This is his seventh and was his seventh State of the State. I agree with him a number of issues. Verbal threshold. If we can't get it through the Senate, then let's abolish the system. Let's get the state out of insurance, automobile insurance. I totally agree with that. I voted for it a number of times, so Tom Kean and I agree in that area. The bond issues, he's talking about approximately $500 million in bond issue. One bond issue that Larry Weiss and I are very interested in that he did not mention is the bridge bond issue over railroad tracks. Very important to all of us in this state. And so therefore, when we talk about $500 million there and our bill for $200 million, that's $700 million on bond issues. I doubt if that will go through in any year in New Jersey. So I have some problems as to the bond issue, although I believe in what he was looking for in open space. I'd like to see more open space in the urban areas. I don't know how we achieve that, but he talked about that, and I agree with him. The governor was upbeat, as John indicated. I thought he presented it very well. We have some problems in area of education. When the budget comes forward, We've been told and have been given some advance warning that full funding formula is not going to be met. I have always had a major problem with that. I'm not quite sure whether I could agree with him when he talks about undoing physical education and telling the children in schools that phys ed is not going to be a requirement. I always felt when I was a student in high school and public school, that was the best place to get rid of a lot of tension in the phys ed class. So he may have some problems in the legislature because that was, I think, a surprise to a lot of us. No one had heard that message, nor was prepared to hear that. So I think he's going to have some problems with some of his initiatives, but by and large, we will try to help him in the Assembly.
What's your response to what Senator Lynch said a minute ago about it's what he didn't hear in the speech, and primarily the tax relief and the urban crisis that the city mayors, like Senator Lynch here,
more than urban, it's suburban, it's in Chuck's area, it's in everybody's area. It doesn't relate just to urbans today.
And I don't think the State of the State was the proper format for that message. I think the budget, he will have to bring forth his thoughts in the budget for the coming fiscal year. We have problems with municipal aid, and I was talking to Senator Lynch earlier about that. We have problems in full funding of education. These are budgetary items that I'm sure the governor will talk about in his budget message.
Well, he's already talked about the fact that he's going to fund education, public education, at the lowest level since T&E started in 1975, at a percentage of less than 92% of the funding formula. That's a dramatic decrease. That's going to hurt everyone across the board. And it's going to make it particularly difficult in the cities. On that issue, he said he has new urban initiatives for preschool and so forth in 4 urban communities. Jersey City is an example. They're taking $22 million away from full funding and giving them back $8 million for some urban initiative for preschool program, which is not unlike an urban initiative he announced a couple of years ago through Commissioner Cooperman that's now being abandoned. And there's some other things. He talked about auto insurance that Chuck pointed out that's really number one on the agenda in the minds and hearts of the people of the state of New Jersey right now. No matter where you go, you still hear auto insurance. They don't want to relate to the fact that health insurance has gone up more significantly than auto insurance. They want relief. They want something done about this mess that we've got out there. And the governor says still, as he said for 7 years, that the verbal threshold is going to solve this problem. And he cited an example of a young man at NJIT who had to leave school because he couldn't pay the $1,800 bill for his auto insurance. May very well be true. But the verbal threshold, at the very least, would lower his bill by $50. And I suggest that what he's saying is that for that $50, he's going to be able to stay in NJIT, and that our problems will be all solved. The auto insurance problem has a lot more to do with it than the verbal threshold. The Allstate case demonstrates clearly that they made money in only one area, liability, not comprehensive, not property damage, and so forth and so on. And they had a rollback on their rates on liability. Sure, there's something wrong with the system, and sure, it has to be cured. I think we've got to get the public in on it. I think we've got to give the public some options on the ballot. We've got to give them an opportunity to vote on what it is that we're going to have for auto insurance in the future. And absent that, we're never going to satisfy the public that they played a real part in this process. Abandoning the system and going back has its problems.
All right,
Larry, that's great. I agree with John. Let's let the public get involved. We passed INR in the Assembly. This is an ideal question for initiative and referendum. If we can't solve the problem in the legislature, and I believe we've tried to solve the problem in the Assembly, we've talked about the verbal threshold. If the Senate does not agree with a verbal threshold, then let's put it on the ballot. Let's see if the people agree with that. Because we have turned the corner, only slightly, in automobile insurance, where we were always first. Now we're second. We just heard that recently. Massachusetts is the highest automobile insurance state, not New Jersey. I can't tell that from my automobile insurance bill. I've been an advocate for a verbal threshold, Michigan style. We have also, and we have looked at the JUA. I don't want this to become an automobile insurance program, but the governor brought it out. He said, if you cannot give me a true verbal threshold, then get rid of the system.
How's it going to pay for the $2.5 billion deficit in the JUA? The verbal threshold does none of that. For me, and I have 2 cars, it saves me $20 a car. I just had a $200 per car Remick go on. That's $180 short if I had a verbal threshold. It's not the answer to the public's problem. It's a deception. We've got to give them something that's tangible. Let them participate in the ultimate resolution of it. I agree with you wholeheartedly. We can put that on the ballot. We've got to give them something significant and tangible to work with. And it would also allow the industry and the lawyers and the consumer groups to go out there and fight the battle in public and educate the public on what's wrong with the system and what can be done about it and what can't be done about it.
But we've been going around the state, when I say we, I mean the state has been going around for years and years and years on this whole issue. You're not going to get the mandatory verbal threshold. Why not just scrap it all together and start all over?
Well, Larry, we have voted in the Assembly 4 times for the Michigan verbal threshold. The Senate has not. Now, if the Senate says, in fact, they
and in the Democratic response to the State of the State message, Senator Russo said he doubted if there was enough support in the Senate.
And we voted on it 3 times. We voted on it, and it hasn't passed.
Fine.
Okay, so why not just let's just throw the baby out with the bathwater and start over.
The problem is it's still the same smoke and mirrors. If you allow the debate to stay with verbal threshold, you're deceiving the public because you can't save them any money through the verbal threshold. It's not the fix the system needs. It doesn't address a $2.5 billion shortfall in the JUA. It doesn't remove people from the JUA and put them in the voluntary market. It doesn't give the people any relief. And what you do by going back is you shift burdens. You go back and you say you no longer have PIP benefits. You take $1 medical coverage and now you put it on the back of your major medical policy, which is now about $3,800 a family for good coverage for like city employees in New Brunswick where I'm the mayor. $3,800 a family, gone up so dramatically. Take $1 medical coverage under auto insurance, shift it back to the major medicals. You're just doing another smoke and mirrors. So each way has its problem, but whatever we do, I think we've got to make the public a part of it. They've got to participate in the debate, and I think they ought to vote on the resolution.
Well, if John agrees with that and he believes that, then the public would vote today to abolish no fault. They would abolish the JUA. They would tell the state to get out of the insurance business, and I agree with that because I've heard the public. It seems that the Senate doesn't want to listen to the public, and I can't believe truly that this is the case because one, if it doesn't work, get rid of it. You know, I've heard of corporations and private enterprise going bankrupt. What do? You
We didn't start the JUA. Governor Kean started the JUA, and you're Commissioner of Insurance. And we told the Commissioner of Insurance that it was bankrupt, and they denied it.
Larry, it was voted in under a Democratic legislature.
Absolutely
Period.
not.
Well, it sure was.
It was Governor Kean's package with his Commissioner of Insurance in 1983.
In 1983, I believe the Senate was controlled by Democrats and the Assembly was controlled by Democrats. So John is incorrect here, and I'm sure he'll agree with that.
Who has administered the program that hasn't collected the surcharge?
So therefore, when we talk automobile insurance, let me say that if you don't want a verbal threshold, Michigan style, then get rid of the system, but get the state out of insurance. And I'll tell you, if I put that question on the ballot in New Jersey, overwhelmingly, the vote would be 90 to 95% in the affirmative.
And we'd both vote for it. But who's going to pay for the $2.5 billion debt in the JUA that Governor Kean and his Commissioner of Insurance created through mismanagement? And who's going to pay for the debt that's created because the Attorney General doesn't collect $50 million a year in surcharges that are supposed to be going to the JUA that you and I are paying for with these REMICs? And who's going to pay for those downsides that are a result of the fraud that the governor's talking about yesterday in his message, the other day in his message? Who's going to pay for that? When the governor, through the 83 legislation, has the power to create a fraud bureau to get the bad lawyers, to get the bad doctors, to get the bad body shops, to get the bad insurance adjusters and so forth, and they haven't even created the office yet, 5 years later.
Except that John forgets that we've put the legislation into effect. So the legislature has done its job. The JUA is being reformed now. We're forcing the insurance companies to take people into the voluntary market at the rate of 20% a year. So within 3 to 4 years, the good drivers will be out of the JUA. The bad drivers will be paying their freight. We have to have an assigned risk or a JUA, but the state should be out of it. We should never have gotten into it in the first place.
Well, you're a Republican. You agree that it's been administered properly?
Well,
you say that?
I have problems there. I've told people this publicly, that I've had trouble with the insurance department and how they've administered the JUA. That's not a secret. You don't have to be a Republican to know that, John. But I also know that Democrats don't want a verbal threshold for some reason, and you will not vote for it.
Put it on the ballot.
Have you ever voted for it?
Let the public vote for it.
Wait a minute. I think this is a good question. Has John Lynch ever voted for a verbal threshold?
Absolutely.
You have?
Yes.
Okay. Has it ever passed the Senate?
A Michigan
style?
verbal did not.
All right.
But put it on the ballot. I have no problem with that.
Fine.
And I don't think most of the people in the Senate would have a problem with that.
Well, I'm sure that if
But the
John...
public would then learn for the first time that it isn't going to save them any money, and that the problems with the system are much larger than that.
If John agrees with that, then he could put an SCR into the Senate and get it passed as majority leader, and I could put an ACR in and get it passed in the Assembly, and we could get it on the ballot. I'd like to see the Senate do it. They talk a good show. Unfortunately, when it comes to the Michigan-style verbal threshold, they don't produce.
All right, I want to move on to another area here, and that is, and this is actually a bill that you have, Assemblyman Haytaian, to help municipalities, your areas, and cities like Mayor Lynch's over here. And that bill would dedicate, I believe it's the utility tax.
122, that's
it's
right.
The utility
gross
tax,
receipts.
the gross receipts utility tax. You would dedicate that, give the money to cities and municipalities that are strapped right now. Right. But your critics contend that it's not really going to help the distressed cities all that much, and the wealthy communities are going to get more than they really deserve.
The critics come about on Bill A 4100, not ACR 122. ACR 122, which is the constitutional amendment that would dedicate all of the gross receipts to municipalities so that no future governor, and it started with Brendan Byrne, they started skimming off the top of the gross receipts tax so that they could put it in the general revenue budget. The point is, I believe the municipality should have all of that money. We pay it as ratepayers, so there's no revenue source necessary. We pay it on our utility bills now. It's on the bottom of the bill. Utilities companies have gotten smart too. They say so much of this bill is being put into the gross receipts tax. My ACR says dedicate it all to the municipalities. Future governors can't touch it. That passed in the Appropriations Committee 13-0 with one abstention. So there are no critics there as far as I know. The critics come in on Assembly Bill 4100, and that is the formula on how it is to be distributed, the skimming of what governors have taken off the top. And in that, I think we could have dialogue. I think we can have compromise. I think we can discuss it. But I don't think it should just be thrown out.
I think the number that I saw was for, I think aid for New Brunswick would be $500,000 under the formula that you're proposing. Now, if I'm incorrect there, correct me on that.
I'm not sure. But, in New Brunswick, John may have seen that. But I know my municipalities receive the monies that they rightfully should receive under these formulas. Right now, $150 million is taken off the top, or $149 million, and therefore the total is $864 million in gross receipts. When you take $150 million off the top, it's a lot of monies that, in fact, do not go to municipalities. The governor has told us, and John may have a differing of opinion, 120 of that $150 million goes to distressed cities, and therefore $30 million goes in the pot. I'm not quite sure. I mean, you know, once it goes into general revenue, the governor could tell you and I and the administration, wherever they think it's going, it's going. In fact, there is nothing in the budget that says $150 million of gross receipts tax go $120 million to distressed cities and $30 million into reserve. All I'm saying is that it's in the general fund and therefore then could be used for whatever expenditures the governor thinks it should be used for. I'm saying it should go for municipalities only.
Larry, this begs the question. Again, I don't disagree with what Chuck's saying that the gross receipts tax was intended to go back to the municipalities, and it should. But the governor says, I use it for school aid, and it's really going back to the municipalities, therefore for property tax relief. If I don't use it for school aid and I give it back to the municipalities, I'm going to cut your school aid. You're still going to have the same bottom line property tax-wise, a little bit less on your municipal, but a lot more on your school. So the bottom line's still the same. It's a smoke and mirrors game. But the monies belong coming back to the communities under the law. There's no question about that. I agree with that. The problem has to do with the fact that where's the governor actually using it when he skims? He tells us that he's using it for the school aid funding, which is really supposed to be funded out of the T&E law under the income tax from 1975. And he's using the gross receipts to assist in that regard. And even with that skim, and even with using it that way, he's underfunding the school aid formula, which is hurting the property taxpayers. But none of this, regardless of whether you talk about it from the governor's side or the Assembly Republican side, changes the one thing that's critical. 47% of all dollars raised to support all levels of government come from the property tax. This doesn't change that one iota because the governor is using it for property tax relief. We've got to change that ratio. You've got to bring down the property tax, the amount we rely upon it, and raise other revenue sources. Particularly the income tax for the rich in this state, who get too much of a break. People can't afford to live in their houses. The middle class people making $50,000 a year can't afford to live in their houses. Their property taxes are going through the roof. Forget the senior citizens. They don't even have a chance to stay in their own house in the areas where property tax is going up so dramatically. $1 billion increase in property taxes last year across the state. Another $1 billion coming up this year, and not one program to change that. This doesn't offer that relief because the governor still has the option within that general fund to cut back minimum aid payments for education to the suburban and rural communities, to cut back transportation aid, to cut back in a variety of ways that still brings you to the same bottom line. So until you shift that 47% down, the burden you place on the backs of the property taxpayers in this state, which is the highest in the land, until you change that number, nothing else happens. Maybe one town is a little bit better off than another town, but the property taxpayers are paying too much, and they can't afford it, and it has nothing to do with their ability to pay. It has nothing to do with whether you make $10,000 and you're a senior citizen on a fixed income, or whether you make $600,000 and you're a corporate executive who came in here from Connecticut.
Larry, John constantly wants to look at the Slurp Commission, and I've told him a number of times on your programs and on others that let's look at the E in Slurp. Why do we always need more revenue and not ready to cut expenditures?
This isn't more revenue. This is revenue neutral.
Listen, this is not revenue neutral. When you say
don't raise a dime more money.
When John Lynch says you're not bringing up or you're not bringing down a property tax, and he's correct. You're not bringing the percentages down, therefore you're going to have to work it out. He's talking about more income tax or more sales tax monies. Somewhere, that's the revenue source. He needs a revenue source to do what he's saying. I'm saying you don't need the revenue source, reduce the expenditures. I agree with John when it comes to education. Full funding is, in my estimation, full funding should have been accomplished every year. It's the law. We understand that. That's why the income tax went in. When the income tax went in 1976, we were told that our property taxes would be reduced. That hasn't happened to Chuck Haytaian. I don't know about John Lynch. My property taxes didn't go down when the income tax came in. So John's saying we need more taxes. We need more revenue. We have to reduce property taxes. I don't agree with him. I don't believe that when you give money to political people and elected officials, that money is spent. And I'm telling John, let's cut expenditures. Let's do it this year. I think he would agree with me that we take a fine-tooth comb, go through and axe it out, look at this budget and say expenditures must go down. Otherwise, we can't live within our means.
We had the best boom time in the history of the modern history of this state over the last several years with the economy perking so strongly and unemployment being low and the revenues being up so heavy. If we were ever going to do tax reform, we had an opportunity to do it. And I didn't see the Assembly Republicans looking to achieve that, nor did I see Tom Kean looking to do that, albeit that he's had some very fine years. I think he had the opportunity because he was a strong leader, he was perceived that way, he was extremely popular to the people of this state. He could have put his finger on the problem instead of delaying the analysis of this problem for 5 years through the Slurp vehicle, which I don't respect at all. I thought that process was flawed from the beginning. The problem is clear. We have to bite the bullet. We've got to ensure that we get more funding back to the municipalities across the board, urban, suburban, and rural, because they're all hurting from the income tax. We've got to do things more based upon need. And maybe we have to make cuts. I have no problem with that at all. But you don't make cuts by full funding the school formula. We agree with that ought to be done. Where do you start cutting? Where did you cut last year in the appropriations process in the Assembly? What major programs and initiatives did you cut back on in the boom time to try and assist the property taxpayer who last year went for $500 million just in garbage alone in increased costs?
We've tried, Larry. We've tried in the Assembly. As you know, the budget process is one where now both houses have their own appropriations committee, and the compromises come in at the end. If, in fact, we could have gotten both houses to agree to continue the Joint Appropriations Committee, I think we could have gotten the cuts that I'm talking about. Unfortunately, that didn't occur. And during boom times, revenues were available and revenues were spent. And so John proves what I say. You give the elected officials more money, they're going to spend it. And we must take a very close look at that budget this year. We must cut in areas, not in education. I've been an advocate of full funding. I repeat it again. Full funding is necessary. It only happens, it seems, in re-election years for the administrations. whoever is in office. It doesn't happen when we're running, and I'd like to see full funding this time and every year. Again, that is the law. I have an ACR that's in place that says fully fund education. Put it on the ballot. People would vote for that. I'm sure of it.
Are we really looking at, in this state, I've heard skepticism that the state is in as bad as financial shape as the governor's office says it is. Senator Russo and Assemblyman Willie Brown have both said they're not sure revenues are $290 million off. What are your feelings on that, and how is that going to dictate?
Well, we'll find that out. Legislative Services will do their analysis on revenues. The administration does theirs. Usually the administration on revenues are lower than the actual case. This time they're claiming a shortfall in their projected revenues of $290 million. I'm not sure if that's a fact yet. We will find that out during the appropriations process.
What's happened, Larry, is that usually you would expect the governor to be conservative on the revenue projections. And back in budget time last year, in June and so in the spring, the governor was pretty optimistic about revenues for fiscal 1990, or fiscal 89. And that some of our people were saying that it was probably being too optimistic. And that's unusual for a governor to be optimistic. They want to be conservative, and then they'll have a larger surplus at the end. Rightfully so. We have to have a balanced operation. And Governor Kean's been sensitive to that from day one. But in this particular case, some of the legislative people thought that the projections were overly optimistic. That seems to have proven to be correct, at least in the first half of the fiscal year. That could alter dramatically. We don't have December figures. That could change. A lot of things can change. But the governor, in seeing what's taking place, rightfully so, draws attention to it and says, wait a minute, it could be this bad. And we therefore have to tighten up. We have to be careful. We have to be concerned what might happen over these next 6 months, lest we fall in a position that will impact the 1990 budget and we'll be have a real problem on our hands. So he's doing the right thing. What actually happens, you need a crystal ball to figure out. The economists can tell you one thing, and the practical people might tell you another thing, but the real world tells you that we have to be sensitive to it, and I think everybody is. And I think the budget process is going to be one that we're not only paying attention to the programs and trying to pare them down somewhat, but also watching what's happening on the revenue side each and every month to see what the future looks like.
Okay, we're running out of time here, so I just want to ask you one quick question. This is the governor's last year in office, and how many of these lame duck proposals are going to fly? How much clout does Tom Kean have left? Let's start again over here with you, Senator Lynch.
Well, I hope that a lot of his programs fly, but I'll be waiting to see the budget to see what's really in the programs. Affordable housing is one major area that I'm very concerned about. The open space area, that we all want to go forward with open space preservation, but if nobody's going to be willing to pay for a bond issue, if you really have bottom line problems, and I think we need a permanent funding source for natural resources, open space preservation, farmland preservation, and the like. More than that, I wish him well in his last year. You know it's going to be difficult. He knows it's going to be difficult. Lame duck is not easy, but he's a popular governor. If he wants to drive some of these programs forward, he's going to get them.
All right, quickly, Assemblyman Haytaian, also keeping in mind your entire House is up for re-election.
Popular governor, a person that I've worked with very closely, always got 41 votes when we needed 41 votes, and it was critical to him. I intend to do the same, or try to do the same this year. Tom Kean is a very popular governor. And so therefore, I believe the programs that he's put forth will fly. With the help of the Senate, we'll get the best for the people of this state. New Jersey is the best. Tom Kean has done that and shown in the last 7 years that he could bring that up to where it should be.
All right. I'm afraid on that note, I've got to wrap it up. We'll be watching the legislative actions in the weeks to come. Assemblyman Haytaian, Senator Lynch, thank you for being with us today on the Record. I'm Larry Stuelpnagel. Thank you for joining us.